All right, so getting back to the story of Ahab and Naboth, however you want to pronounce
Yeah,
it.
I've probably been reading it that way for 10 years and don't know if it's right or not. So.
Right, right. And I've been hearing it Naboth my whole life, and so who knows? The issue here is that what we see here is kind of a continuation of the last segment where we talked about that the hierarchy that a whatever God you worship, that worship of that God establishes a hierarchy of values in your life and in the society at large around you as other people worship in that same way, and that has certain outcomes to it, both long term and short term. And we talked about how worshiping an idol can create apparent short-term success, as it did with the dynasty that Omri had established and that Ahab is part of. But that sometimes then will, and often will, create long-term instability and problems. And we see an example of this here with Ahab and his desire for Naboth's vineyard. Now, why won't Naboth sell it to him? Why can't Naboth just say, "Hey, here you go"?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, he could, but when the land was distributed to the nation of Israel, there was a very specific prescription for how this was done, and it was also then when your family received this land, it was to stay in your family, and if you were ever in debt or something like that, you could kind of lease it out for a season, but at the year of Jubilee, it would resort back to your family and stuff like this, and so this was a permanent inheritance in God's eyes, and that's Naboth was like, I can't. This is the inheritance God has given me.
So he's being put in a position of either being obedient to Ahab or being obedient to God, and he chooses to be obedient to God. And then what is kind of revealed in Ahab's character here as a result of this initial rejection of his offer?
He's kind of a weak person. Obviously he's the king, so in a sense he's the strongest man in the land in a sense, or at least the strongest position. But he's kind of a weak person. Like, I can't have my vegetable garden, and sobbing on his bed, and it kind of is pathetic. I don't know.
Yeah, there certainly is a pathetic aspect to this story and this reaction that he has. And so who knows? Maybe that's where it would have ended, and he just would have stewed and cried and everything. But then Jezebel, Ahab's wife, comes in, and she's got a plan. And Jezebel is a woman who is a foreigner and worships foreign gods and has led a lot of people astray in idolatry and worship. And what's Jezebel's plan for this situation?
Yeah. Jezebel's plan is to hire a couple of no-gooders to give false testimony against Naboth and have him killed. They still kind of follow the prescription of the law, set out, you got to have at least 2 witnesses to anything to kind of have it proven and stuff. But, and it's a real simple solution for her. And, it dawns on me that, here his wife has a plan that's against God's law for how they can enjoy the fruit of a garden. And I don't know if there's any parallel supposed to be there or not, but just dawns on me now.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of parallels to this and to the original garden story, and I think that these can come back up because God's trying to clue us into some patterns here. And so they kind of follow God's law and use it to accomplish something that's far outside of God's law. And given our discussion in the last segment about the short-term benefits but long-term instability, do you see that being reflected in this story here? How does that apply? How does this give them some short-term benefits but long-term problems?
Obviously, they get in the end, or in the beginning, I guess, they get Naboth's vegetable garden for their own, and Naboth is killed. But one, God does judge him for this very act in the future, but also, like, I don't know how much the Bible discussed it. I have to go back and read it, but this can't be good for your kingdom when your people see that you're willing to kill and seize property just on a whim. That can't be good for people being pro Ahab.
Yeah, I think that God illustrates that very principle by the fact that basically these rulers, Ahab and Jezebel, are told that because of this action of theirs, judgment's going to fall on him, and there's this element of judgment that is supposed to clue people into the fact that this is a divine judgment, which is that just as the dogs came and basically ate the remains of Naboth, that the same things would happen to them. And throughout the story, that's what we see exactly happens. And so the Bible is drawing a parallel here between their momentary triumph over Naboth and the downfall of their kingdom. And if we look back at Genesis and we look back at the idea of taking kingship too soon, do you see any connections or parallels to those two things?
Absolutely. Here in Genesis, they do try to take kingship too soon, and it ultimately ends in them being expelled from the garden. And obviously the same thing happens to Ahab. And, at one point, Ahab and Jezebel are killed, but all of Ahab's descendants are killed as well. Not one of them left. So it's not just that they're not on the throne anymore, but they're just wiped out.
Yeah, and I think that it's really instructive that Adam and Eve are basically told you need to not eat of this fruit. There's a sacrifice that's required in order to eventually take kingship in a way that's good. Their inability to do that is very similar to what the story we have here, which is, I won't withhold anything from me. And that inability to do that, what it creates is a kingship that only looks out for itself and doesn't look out for what it is supposed to be ruling over. And so if your entire focus is your own glory and not the glory of what you're ruling over, then you're going to create what you're ruling over is going to be weak. And how does that affect your future as a king?
Well, being the king over a weak kingdom is not a very powerful position. Obviously, being a king over a very powerful kingdom is a much better one. And if through your actions you make your own kingdom weak, you've undermined your entire. You've tried to raise your own glory, but have undercut it at every turn.
Yeah, and I think that there's a really big problem with this kind of kingship, and the fact that your palace and maybe your neighborhood and all the people they're all really glorious. They're the chosen ones, and your perception is then that your kingdom is glorious because you've glorified yourself, and you don't see the weakness in your own kingdom, and then you might make some major miscalculations about going forward and perhaps attacking other kingdoms. And we might even look at current events and see something similar to this.
I thought that might be what you were alluding to.
But it's true in our own lives as well. And I think that this story is something that we should really pay attention to.